that, this is a great time to get them set up.
It was a dreary, rainy day in January, and I was visiting my parents in Fort Payne, Alabama. They live up on the mountain, and their property borders the DeSoto State Park that's up there, so they're surrounded by acres and acres of woods, and it's really beautiful. And my mom loves to walk in the woods, especially on a rainy winter day. That's her favorite time to go out. She finds it very peaceful and beautiful. So on this particular day in January, she invited me to go on a walk in the woods with her. And I thought, okay, that sounds good. I'll get to leave my 4 little kids with my husband, Scott, and I'm going to go for a walk in the woods. She told me there was a certain spot she wanted to take me to. She liked to call it her tea room. It was a clearing, and there was a stump or two that you could sit on, and she liked to take like a thermos of coffee or something out there and sit and just kind of enjoy the peace and the quiet and the beauty of the woods. So that sounded good to me. So it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It had stopped raining, so we set off into the woods. She and I both forgot our cell phones, but I wasn't really worried about that. We weren't going to go far. This tea room spot was close to the house. We weren't going to be gone long. We didn't have a water bottle or anything, but again, I wasn't too worried about that. We weren't going to sweat. It's January. And I had full faith in my mom, who might be listening to this sermon, by the way. At least it's not Mother's Day, right? You see, the problem is that my mom, who is a fabulous, smart, wonderful person, let me just say that, she just has a terrible sense of direction. She will tell you this too. I'm not just throwing her under the bus. And unfortunately, I got my sense of direction from my mom. So here we are, no sense of direction, no phones, no water, no worries, headed off into the woods to find this tea room. And after we had been walking for a while, we came up on basically a swamp. Because it had been raining so much, there was this spot in the woods that we couldn't just walk through because it was covered in water, and it actually got pretty deep. So we started trying to make our way around this swamp, but it turns out it was really big. Now, my mom had on the right shoes for this kind of trip, but I didn't. I just was wearing tennis shoes, and so we were trying to avoid walking in the water, but it became apparent that was unavoidable, so, who cares? I just traipsed right through it. So now I have wet feet to add to this adventure. So we get through the swamp, we're walking through the woods, I'm looking down, squish, 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 watching where I'm putting my feet, and my mom, whom I was following, stops. And I look up, and I see this look on her face. And I know what it means, because I've seen it before. I've seen it when I was a kid and we're driving someplace new, and this was before GPS. I knew that we were never going to make it to that tea room, and that we didn't know how to get back home. We were completely lost. Now, this is a funny story now. It's one we like to tell around the Thanksgiving table and that kind of thing. But if you have ever really been lost before, that is not a good feeling at all. It's terrifying. And when I realized that this was our situation, I looked around. There's no trail, there's no path, and all I can see are trees. They're surrounding us. And we had no idea what to do. It was terrifying. And on top of having no idea what to do, we have 0 Boy Scout skills. It's starting to get late, and it's January, and we know we're going to run out of daylight. And my feet are wet. I kept thinking about how relieved I would be if I could just see some sign of humanity. A trail, of course, would be amazing, but even a light in the distance, or hear a dog bark, or hear a train or a car horn, or see litter on the ground, anything to help us know that we were not hopelessly lost. So we did the only thing we knew to do, and that was to pray really, really hard. And then we just decided that to the best of our limited ability, we were going to pick a direction and walk in it, praying all the way. So we did this, and we did this for a long time. And finally, we come up on this hill that goes back down into a valley. And when we got to the top of the hill and we look down, we see the most beautiful set of power lines I have ever seen. I have never been so excited about power lines in my life because I knew then that we were saved. That in the history of humanity, somebody had been there and put those power lines and we could follow them, and eventually it would bring us to a road. We might be in Tennessee, but we would find civilization again. And that's exactly what happened. We followed those power lines. Eventually we came to a road. We were not in Tennessee. Turns out we weren't that far from home. We made it home before dark to our husbands, who were just at that moment starting to think, they've been gone a while. As I thought about this journey into the woods with my mom, it made me think back to January, the beginning of this year, the beginning of 2020, when we were in a sermon series called Journey. Do you remember this? It seems so long ago to me right now, but we were setting out and we were seeking where God was going to lead us on our journey as a church. Some of us were getting ready for a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. It was exciting. There was a healthy dose of anticipation as we began this brand new year with the number 2020. I mean, it just sounds good. I remember preaching the last sermon of that series, and it just so happened that that was the day that Wade announced to the church that he and his family would be leaving. And the sermon that day was titled Into the Unknown, named after a song from the Disney movie Frozen 2. You might remember Andrew and the music team sang it and did such a crazy good job with that. And I remember feeling such a sense of God's presence that day. Even with the difficult news that Wade was giving everybody, even with all the things that we were feeling, I just had this feeling, I just knew that God was taking care of us. That yes, we were headed into the unknown, but that was okay. We could do it with confidence because God was leading us and we were going to be okay. And there was this ring to that phrase, into the unknown. It was a call to faith and it was a call to adventure. And I felt like we were ready as a church. We were ready for whatever lay ahead. We had no idea. My husband told me a Mike Tyson quote this week. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. We had no idea. We had no idea what we were headed for when we marched into the unknown boldly that day. So this week, as I was preparing for this sermon, another Frozen 2 song came to my mind. Lost in the Woods. It's what it feels like to me. Like we have surely wandered off the path because this can't be right. Today we're going to read a story from the book of Exodus about a group of people who I suspect had a lost in the woods kind of feeling. It's the story of the Israelites who, until recently, have been slaves. They've lived as slaves for years. They've been despised. They've been abused. And they cried out to God, and God heard their cry and raised up a leader for them in Moses. And through Moses, God rescued them from Egypt, but not just any rescue. God showed off. There was zero doubt in anyone's mind that God was with them, that God was the one rescuing them, that God was the one bringing them out of the place where they were, and that God was going to lead them to a good place. Zero doubt. In the story we're going to read today, the Israelites are several weeks into their journey. It's been about a month since God split the sea for them so they could walk through on dry land. Can you imagine that? That's what they've just seen. That's what they've recently experienced after years of slavery. But let's see what's going on with the Israelites now, about a month in. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn with me to Exodus chapter 16, starting in verse 1. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, 'At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.'" In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as the frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The Israelites had been so happy the day God rescued them and brought them out of slavery. They had celebrated with singing and dancing. They were ready. They had faith. They had evidence that God was leading them, that they were on the right journey. But now, they're tired. They've been wandering around this wilderness for a month. They're out of food. This was not exactly what they had in mind when they came bursting out of Egypt. They don't even have their basic needs met, and they are done. They're done to the point that they even look back on slavery and bondage and declare that they'd rather be back there where at least they knew where their next meal was coming from, where at least they knew there would be a next meal, where at least they knew where they were. Lost in the woods, they feel it. And in their distress, and in their hunger, in their grief and pain, they experience a crisis of faith, and they forget. They forget what they saw God do in Egypt, the plagues that didn't touch them, the Red Sea that God literally split for them. They forget the songs of deliverance they sang. They forget the misery of bondage. They forget what they have just experienced, what they have just seen God do. It's a testimony to God's amazing grace and love that God doesn't send them back to Egypt right then. But God doesn't do that. God doesn't chastise them for their lack of faith, for their grief, even for their grumbling and complaining that helps nobody. Rather than giving them what they deserve, even what they're asking for, what does God do? God provides again. God hears their cry again. God feels their pain again. And God feeds them not just any bread, bread from heaven, manna, the Bible calls it. Nothing they would even know to ask for, nothing they could make for themselves. God is the chef here, and God provides them exactly what they need, exactly the amount they need it, exactly the moment they need it. It's yet another miracle. It's further evidence that these people are loved, that they are in God's hands. And it's a good reminder, and it's a reminder that lasts them all the way to chapter 17. Take a look at it. Chapter 17, verse 1. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" They're not hungry anymore. This time it's thirst. And they respond in the very same way. More grumbling, more doubting, more longing to go back. After all they've been through, they actually ask the question, is God among us or not? And again, what does God do? God provides. God leads them to water from a place they would never look for it. God is incredibly patient with this group of people who feel lost in the woods, afraid, doubtful, confused, mad, people who are grieving because the journey is hard. I find hope in this story about the Israelites because I think it offers us some direction for today. And I literally mean today, this moment. Let's stop for just a second and take a look at where we are in our 2020 journey. We've got a country that is politically polarized, maybe worse than I've ever seen it. We've got cities all across the nation that are hurting and rioting over the sin of racism. COVID-19 has upended all of our lives, and it's only getting worse. Our denomination is still in turmoil. Even though we have kicked that can down the road a little bit, we're still living in that. And the Griffith family, whom we all love dearly, is on their way to Colorado today because God called them there. We can't even get mad about it. And that's not to even mention what might be going on in your own personal life. This is hard. Any one of those things that I just named, if we were dealing with just one of those things, it would be hard. We've got a lot on our plate right now. There's a lot that's punched us in the mouth that we didn't see coming. It turns out that following God into the unknown isn't all fun and adventure. It's difficult. It asks a lot of us, and it's painful. I think we need a moment to sit with that, to let ourselves grieve, to say, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want things to be like they used to be. Where are we? Where are we going? Why did we leave? Is God among us or not? Today, can we pause and can we sit with that for a minute? Can we be honest like the Israelites were? Can we take off our metaphorical masks and be real with each other? This journey is hard right now. And it's hard for many different reasons, and it's okay to acknowledge that and to name it and to feel it and to tell God how we feel about it. It's okay if we don't like where we are right now. It's okay if we're struggling. It's okay if we get tired, if we get confused. It's okay if we shed some tears. There's room for grief on this journey. God's not going to get mad and send us packing. It's okay to grieve. But let's not forget. This was Israel's mistake. Let's not forget what we have seen God do in our individual lives and in the lives of our congregation. Even during this pandemic, have any of you seen God at work? Because I certainly have among you. in ways that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. Let's not forget that. Forgetting is what kept the Israelites wandering around in that desert for 40 years. Forgetting what we know to be true about God is what gets us stuck, lost in the woods, dreaming about the past. Stopping for a moment to catch our breath, to ask our questions. It's okay, it's allowed. But in our grief, we must remind ourselves and remind each other of the truth that we know, that God has walked with us every step of the way in the past, that God is sitting with us right now in this moment today, and that God will be with us in the future. One of my favorite parts of this story of the Israelites is when God is telling Moses where to find the water. God tells Moses to lead people to a rock, not your typical water source. And God said, I will be standing there in front of you. I know where the water is. I know where the water is. There's water in the rocks of all things. Turns out those rocks aren't actually there to make us fall. Those rocks are lessons to be learned that we didn't even know we needed to learn. They're challenges that are hard but make us stronger. Those rocks are gifts. The rocks we thought were there to trip us up are there to give us life. God knows where the water is. The journey isn't a mistake. We didn't take a wrong turn. I want you to hear some verses from Isaiah. These are very familiar. I'm sure you've heard them many times, but I'm going to read them to you. It's Isaiah 40, verse 27 through 31, and I want to read them as a way of helping us remember the truth that we know. So hear these words from God to you. Why do you say, my way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God? Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. Even youths will faint and be weary, and the young will fall exhausted. But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Let's take a really deep breath for a minute. Let's acknowledge where we are and that the journey is hard. Let's tell God how we feel about it and let the tears fall without shame. And let's remember. Let's remember what God has done for us. Let's remember that God is here, that we're not lost in the woods after all. Let's remember that the rocks that we thought were obstacles are full of living water. That this ground, this uneven ground that's hard to walk on, is holy ground. And in the morning, it will be covered with manna, as it always has been. Thanks be to God. Will you pray with me?